This is the thinking of the enemy. Telling you, well, if you do not reap the benefits of doing this powerful and effective prayer, and God does not hear, and then God does not answer that prayer in the time frame that you want it, why are you doing this exercise? Why are you praying? You should just stop wasting your time on God. Because God obviously does not care enough to answer your prayer. But that is the way of that's the way of the world. That is the enemy speaking, saying you do not need to commune with God. So you do not need to devote yourself to prayer. But we have already seen that we have been commanded to pray at all times and to pray without ceasing. And Jesus gave us this wonderful parable and teaching moment in Luke 18, 1 through 6, where Jesus is instructing his disciples to always be praying. And so he tells them the parable of the widow. And the widow is one who keeps coming to an unjust judge. And each day she appears before the judge and she keeps asking him for justice against her adversary. And each time the judge would deny her. But each day the widow shows back right up in front of him the next day, asking once again, give me justice against my adversaries. He denies her. She comes back again. He denies her. She comes back again and again. And again and again, he denies her. Finally, the judge realizes, hey, I can't keep doing this. Because if I keep doing this, she's going to eventually wear me down. And so the widow finally gets justice against her adversaries. You see, this parable of the widow in Luke 18, 1 through 6 lets us know that God indeed hears our prayers and that we are to keep coming to him repeatedly. After all, David in Psalm 34 tells us in verses 15 and 17 that the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous and he hears and his ears are attentive to their cry. The righteous cry out and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from all their troubles. You see, there should be no issue believing that God hears our prayers, for he listens to them. We cry out to God, for it has been made possible for us to go before the eternal throne and to enter to God's presence and cast our prayers to God, who will absolutely hear them. For God is actively listening to our prayers, as the Apostle Peter says in 1 Peter 3:12, where he says, for the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous and his ears are attentive to their prayer, but the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. You see, it's very interesting here what Peter uses, attentive. His ears are attentive to their prayer. And depending on the version that you are reading, it says that God's ears are inclined towards the prayers of his people. This means that God is leaning into prayer. This is that he is physically leaning towards them. Now, one of the many things I learned in a class that I recently took on listening is how much body language plays into letting a speaker know that you are hearing what they're communicating to you. That is, that if you are to lean into a person as they're talking, like slightly lean, like this, it communicates that you hear what they are saying and that you are listening. That you are attentive to every word. But if you lean back, well, then you're not that interested in what they are saying. But when Peter is describing that God, who is hearing and listening to our prayers, is intently leaning in, he hears our prayers. And that God, who is sitting on the everlasting throne, is waiting for us. He's eager to hear our prayers. He wants to hear our cries. And this is why the Apostle John says in 1 John 5:15, and if we know that he hears us, whatever we ask, we know that we have what we have asked of him. That is, that God does not just hear our prayers, but we have actually been granted what we have been asked. And the problem here stems why we struggle with the devotion of prayer when it comes to God answering our prayers, is because we believe God to be too slow in his response. We believe God does not answer our prayers fast enough. And because God does not answer our prayers fast enough, then, well, God must not answer them. But God is not slow like we think God is. As Peter says in 2 Peter 3:9, that the Lord is not slow in keeping his promises, as some understand slowness. Instead, he is patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance. For God acts according to his will. God acts according to his timing. For man's lives are lived too fast and are too short for us to fully understand the ways of God. For his ways are higher than ours, and his thoughts are higher than ours. But this should not keep us from being devoted in prayer. God is always inclining to us. God is always listening. God is attentive to our prayers. And God answers our prayers. May not be the result that we want them to be, or the result that we prefer. But just because we don't get the results that we need, or believe that God didn't answer the prayers that we wanted, does not mean that we should stop praying. This goes back to what it means to be devoted to prayer. To keep persevering regardless of all the difficulties and circumstances experienced. To never give up on praying. To be devoted. Like the widow in the parable that Jesus told in Luke 18:1-6, was devoted and kept coming back and back. We must always continue to keep coming back and back to God in prayer. So this morning I know that I have thrown some numbers at you, and I have talked about prayer and all these things regarding the current state of prayer, and realizing how important prayer is to our faith.